Before we begin, subscribe for more chilling stories and tell me which city you're watching from. I'd love to know. Snow dusted the eaves of Willowbrook Clinic like forgotten ash, the Montana wind keening through pines that flanked the clapboard building, their branches scraping windows like insistent fingers. Dr. Elias Thorne adjusted his stethoscope in the dim hallway, the fluorescent hum overhead flickering as if breathing labored, his footsteps echoing soft on linoleum worn thin by decades of hurried soles. At 38, Elias had inherited the practice from his father, a man whose hands shook only in final years, tending to Willowbrook's ailments with a quiet authority that masked the town's undercurrents. Debts whispered over fences, affairs buried under church suppers, the slow unraveling of elders who lingered too long in rocking chairs by pot-belly stoves. Nurse Abigail Hale moved through the wards like a benediction, her silver hair pinned in a chignon that defied entropy, cardigan draped over shoulders with a brooch of etched oak leaf catching light like a talisman. She cooed to patients in voices honeyed with memory. "There now, Mr. Finch, let's chase that ache away." Her touch lingering on wrists, veins mapping secrets beneath translucent skin. Elias noticed the rhythm first in ledger margins, during late shifts when the clinic emptied to ghosts, elders slipping away not in storms of crisis, but gentle drifts, 2 in the frost of January, 3 come February's thaw, 4 by March's mud season, charts closing like eyes in repose. No common thread save the quiet, heart stutters hushed, breaths easing to sighs, families nodding through tears with gratitude veiled as grief. He pored over files by desk lamp, coffee cooling untouched, fingers tracing med-adjustments penciled faint, morphine titrated up a notch, sedative halved then doubled, generics swapped for brands whose seals gleamed suspect under scrutiny, plastic rims softened as if kissed by flame. Paranoia stirred faint, a draft at his nape, insurance quirks perhaps, or Abigail's efficiencies streamlining end of days. Yet guilt pricked, unbidden. Had he signed off too hasty on dosages, eyes blurred by double shifts, complicit in the mercy that blurred lines? One evening as sleet tapped, insistent, old Mrs. Riley's daughter arrived frantic, clutching vials where caps bore that subtle warp. Inner rings melted faint like wax under heat. Elias examined them close, light angling sharp, the anomaly mocking his doubt. "Manufacturing flaw," he murmured, but sleep evaded, dreams threading clinic halls with shadows that pulled at bedsides, forms elongated, whispering tallies of the departed. Abigail found him at dawn, her hand on his shoulder light as snowfall, voice slowing the room's pulse. "Easing the burden, doctor. They ask with their eyes, the ones who hurt too deep." He recoiled, pulse spiking, but her gaze held steady, pupils dark pools reflecting his unease. And in that mirror, guilt bloomed. Had he not turned away from his mother's decline years back, letting pain claim her slow while he buried in books? The clinic thrummed subdued, patients fewer, their coughs muffled behind doors that creaked open to Abigail's silhouette. Tray balanced graceful, vials glinting under hall sconces. Elias shadowed around, stethoscope cold against his chest, watching as she administered to Mr. Ellis, the rancher whose lungs rattled like loose gravel, her syringe plunging shore, liquid clear as absolution. Ellis sighed post-injection, eyes glazing serene, but as she withdrew, a shadow detached from the curtain's fold, translucent, humanoid, trailing her like a devoted hound, its form flickering with vein-like scripts of dosage notes. Elias blinked, attributing to fatigue, but paranoia rooted deeper, psychological thorns. What if her kindness masked the ledger of her own, editing lives as she charted vitals? Nights deepened, wind howling choruses outside his cabin on the bluff, where Elias paced floorboards scarred by boot heels, ledger open to tallies that aligned too neat, departures clustering post-Abigail's shifts, families' thanks laced with hollow eyes at funerals where her casserole steamed communal. Whispers infiltrated dreams, not wind, but voices layered faint. She spares us the weight, murmured from beds empty, shadows rising to caress his brow, cool as ether. He confronted her in the supply room amid shelves of gauze and glass, voice pitched low. The changes, Abigail. The warps. Her laugh diffused tension like mist, hand on his wrist steadying, but in her exhale he caught a scent, antiseptic laced with something floral, decay sweet, and behind her the shadow loomed taller, face forming faint, Ellis's, lips curved in silent thanks, eyes pits of accusation. Guilt crashed, waves internal, Elias's signatures on those orders, his oversight, the very needle's path. He fled to the porch, sleet stinging, but the shadow followed, tendrils questing through cracks, whispers insistent, "Join the easing, doctor, your hands ache too." Dawn broke brittle, clinic stirring, Abigail's bun impeccable as she brewed coffee strong, her brooch winking innocent. Yet Elias's rounds unearthed more. A notebook tucked in her station drawer, leather worn soft, pages inscribed with names beside dates, words scrawled cursive, prepared, relieved, arrows pointing to vials logged phantom. Paranoia crested, reality fraying. He pocketed a page, ink smudged palm like blood, and as he left, apparitions swarmed the hall, departed elders in spectral gowns, shuffling silent, their forms dissolving to vapor that clung to his coat, breath sinking to his own labored draw. Homeward, the bluff's isolation mocked, cabin walls pressing, shadows pooling unnatural in corners where no light reached, forming Abigail's, outline, brooch agleam, syringe extended invitation. Elias bolted doors, but sleep brought visitations, Mrs. Riley materializing at bedside, form mist-wreathed, hand pressing his where guilt festered, whispering, "She freed me. Free yourself." Terror coiled visceral, psychological chains. Was mercy murder? Or the veil thin between? Abigail, a reaper cloaked in care. Icicles wept from Willowbrook Clinic's gutters, crystalline tears freezing mid-fall in the sub-zero grip, as Dr. Elias Thorne hunched over his desk, lantern flame dancing erratic across the pilfered notebook's pages, ink bleeding faint under heat like confessions coaxed. The storm raged biblically outside, pines bowing low, their groans harmonizing with the wind's wail that infiltrated vents, carrying echoes of the departed, rasps and sighs layered in dirge. Elias's fingers trembled, tracing entries that mapped his tenure, dosages initialed in his scrawl, patients listed with final notes, eased at 217, aligning to nights he'd signed off blindly, guilt a serpent-devouring tale. Paranoia had metastasized, every creak of footfall, every draft Abigail's breath on his neck, her voice infiltrating thoughts. Mercy mends what time tears. He resolved confrontation that shifts end, but rounds devolved to haunt. Mr. Finch's room dim, Abigail bent close, syringe glinting as she murmured endearments, the air thickening metallic, shadows detaching from ivy stands to weave around the bed, forming a canopy that pulsed faint. Finch arched subtle, breath hitching to stillness, eyes locking Elias's in final gleam, gratitude or plea before glazing over. Abigail straightened, brooch catching light accusatory, her smile serene as she logged the time. But behind her loomed the apparition throng, Finch joining ranks, translucent form nodding accord, joined by Riley and Ellis in spectral cortege, their gowns threadbare, faces serene masks etched with vain scripts of adjusted meds. Elias staggered back, pulse thundering. "What have you done?" His voice cracked, but Abigail's hand stayed his arm, cool as marble, gaze delving deep. "What you couldn't, doctor. The hurting ends." Guilt erupted volcanic, his mother's chart flashing, unsigned mercy he'd begged in youth, now mirrored in his hesitation. Shadows surged, tendrils coiling his ankles, whispers swelling chorus. Sign the easing, let go. He wrenched free, fleeing corridors where apparitions multiplied, elders shuffling walls, hands outstretched with vials empty, brooches winking like fallen stars. Outside, snow blinded, truck buried to axles, but Elias trudged bluffward, notebook clutched talisman, wind howling names, his own, chief, laced with judgment. Cabin loomed sanctuary false, door yielding to chill that seeped bone deep, shadows already pooled hearthside, forming Abigail's silhouette elongated, syringe dripping ether that steamed on floorboards. You've seen the ledger, her echo intoned, form advancing fluid, brooch pulsing heartbeat slow, apparitions framing her like choir, dozens now, Willowbrook's quiet dead, eyes voids reflecting his fractures. Paranoia shattered to terror pure. Elias brandished the notebook, pages tearing free to scatter like leaves in gale, each sheet worthing more shades that circled ravenous, whispers deafening, guilt enumerated, overdoses overlooked, pains prolonged for pride, his hands the true reaper veiled. Abigail's shadow form reached, touch igniting visions, her genesis not malice but pact, years back with the specter of her lost kin, trading doses for peace, the clinic's foundation soaked in unrestful essences, awakened by first easing. Join, she urged, honey over gravel, syringe pressing his palm where guilt burned. Rage flickered, psychological pyre. Elias smashed the lantern, oil blooming flame that licked shadows, apparitions recoiling with hisses, forms unraveling to wisp that fled cracks, Abigail's echo fracturing to sighs of release. Flames devoured notebook remnants, pyre illuminating cabin stark, snow drifting threshold like absolution's veil. Dawn pierced storm's remnants, Willowbrook stirring tentative, clinic sirens distant, investigators summoned by anonymous call, his own. Elias arrived hollowed, badge surrendered voluntary, charts spilling truth under scrutiny, warps analyzed toxin-laced, logs phantom deliveries traced to shadows. Abigail stood serene in cuffs, gaze meeting his without malice, only pity. The hurting persists. Families divided at hearings, some testifying mercy's grace, casseroles shared in lobbies, others weeping betrayal, words failing the wound of kindness curdled. Conviction came swift, endangerment veiling murder's edge, but Elias wandered post-trial, Montana's vastness swallowing, cabin sold, practice shuddered to echoes. Guilt lingered companion quiet, nights on freighter decks or motel neon glows, whispers faint on winds, ease yourself. Apparitions visited sparse, a departed face in Rain Street glass, brooch glint in peripheral, but Willowbrook's reaper faded myth, the clinic reborn with seals fortress tight, doses double counted like prayers. Elias mended slow, hands steady on volunteer lines in drier climes, but in quiet hours he feels the syringe's ghost press, mercy shadow long, reminding that kindness cuts deepest when wielded unseen. The town endures, casseroles warming tables, labels read twice, the gentle reaper a breeze through pines, patient for the next hand to measure the dose. The mist rolled down from the peaks like a shroud, blanketing Eldridge Hollow in a perpetual half-light that blurred the line between day and dusk. John Harlan bricked the wheel of his cruiser, knuckles pale against the cracked leather, as he navigated the serpentine road into town. It was his third patrol since the envelopes began, each mile marker a reminder of the fracture lines spiderwebbing through the community he swore to protect. The radio hissed static, occasionally resolving into fragments of dispatch calls. Another delivery reported at the edge of town, another life cracked open. He killed the engine outside the post office, where his father had worked until the heart attack 2 winters past, and stepped into the chill that seeped through his uniform like accusation. Inside, the air hung heavy with the scent of ink and aged paper, fluorescent tubes flickering overhead as if struggling to illuminate the truth. Old-timers huddled at the counter, their voices low murmurs that ceased when he entered, eyes sliding away like oil on water. "Mornin', Sheriff," muttered Earl Jenkins, the barber with hands steady enough for straight razors, but trembling now as he clutched a newspaper folded too tightly. John nodded, scanning the room for signs, the faint scuff of boots on the threshold, perhaps, or a shadow lingering where it shouldn't. Nothing, just the tick of the wall clock, marking time as if it could stitch wounds closed. He moved to his father's old desk, now piled with reports on the anomalies, wax seals analyzed by the lab in Roanoke, yielding nothing but beeswax from local hives, paper traced to a mill long shuttered in Tennessee. The typewriter font matched no machine in county records, pristine as if printed by ghosts. John's own envelope burned in his memory, its words a litany of failures that played on loop in quiet moments. The collection plate lighter by $20 on a dare at 16. The blind eye turned to bootleg runs that lined his pockets during lean years. The backhand to Clara that split her lip and her trust in equal measure. He confessed none of it, not to God, not to the bottle that numbed the edges. Guilt festered like an untreated wound, and now it suppurated, drawing the town's darkness to him. Outside, the fog thickened, tendrils questing through alleyways where children once chased fireflies. He heard it then, faint as a breath against glass. The rustle, accompanied by a whisper that slithered past his ear, naming his sins in a voice too like Clara's. He whirled, hand on his holster, but the street stood empty, lampposts casting pools of sodium light that warped at the edges. Paranoia, he told himself, rubbing temples that throbbed with the pulse of unspoken fears. Yet as he drove to the diner for black coffee, the whispers followed, weaving through the pines like smoke signals from the damned. Mary Lou served him with hands that shook, her smile a brittle veneer over the envelope's revelations. Petty thefts from the till, a procedure hushed in a clinic across the border, loves tangled in secrecy. "Folks are scared, John," she said, voice pitched low, eyes darting to the window where shadows pooled under the awning. "Last night, I saw something. Tall as a man, but wrong. Slipped right through the wall like it was made of mist." He grunted, sipping the bitter brew, but her words lodged in his chest like buckshot. That afternoon, a call came from Abigail Thorne's Victorian on Elm Street. Another envelope, this one left atop her writing desk, the window latched from inside. John arrived to find her in the parlor, pale as the lace curtains, the paper clutched in fingers veined like lightning. It detailed her complicity in her husband's schemes, forging documents to hide the debts that bankrupted 3 families before their own. "It knows," she whispered, as he took the sheet, her eyes wide with the terror of the exposed. The room felt smaller, walls pressing in, and in the corner, where the grandfather clock stood sentinel, a shadow flickered, elongated, humanoid, dissolving when he turned the light. He pocketed the envelope, promising analysis, but as he left, the whispers resumed, now a chorus, Abigail's voice joining his own, a litany of regrets that clawed at sanity's thin veil. Night fell early, the sun surrendering to clouds bruised purple. John stationed himself on Blackthorn Hill, the burial ground stones jutting like broken teeth from the earth. Flashlight in one hand, revolver in the other, he waited, breath fogging the air. The wind carried scents of pine sap and decay, the ground soft underfoot as if breathing. Hours passed, marked by the distant bark of dogs gone feral with unease. Then movement, a glide at the tree line, silhouette merging with trunk and branch, too smooth for flesh and bone. He raised the light, beam cutting the gloom, revealing only leaves rustling in agitation. But the whisper came clear now, intimate. "John, the plate, the night, her blood on your hands." He fired into the dark, muzzle slash illuminating twisted roots that seemed to recoil, emptied the cylinder, reloads fumbling in gloved fingers, heart hammering a war drum. Silence returned, mocking, but the presence lingered, a weight on his shoulders like judgment's hand. Dawn crept in reluctant, gilding the fog gold. John descended the hill, boots caked in mud that clung like guilt, to find the town stirring uneasily. At the station, reports piled high. Tummy Briggs seen arguing with phantoms in his rear view, Judge Whitaker barricading his doors with law tomes. John pored over them by lamplight, patterns emerging, a convergence on the hollow tree, ancient sentinel at the mound's heart, said to guard spirits restless from old massacres. He resolved to confront it come full dark, but first a stop at home, to arm himself, to steel against the mirrors that now reflected not his face, but Clara's, accusatory and pale. The house loomed, porch swing creaking empty welcome. Inside, the air stale with abandonment. He poured bourbon neat, the glass cold against lips numb from cold. Shadows stretched long across the floorboards, pooling at his feet, and as he drank, they rose, forming outlines of the damned, townsfolk with eyes like voids, mouths opening in silent screams. He smashed the bottle, shards glittering like accusations, and fled into the gathering dusk, the whispers chasing him like hounds on a scent. The trail to Blackthorn Hill wound treacherous underfoot, roots snaking across the path like veins pulsing with malice. John trudged upward, shotgun heavy in his arms, the weight a meager anchor against the rising tide of dread. Moonlight filtered through canopy lace, casting the forest in monochrome. Silver bark, obsidian undergrowth, his shadow trailing, elongated and treacherous. The whispers had evolved, no longer fragmented, but a symphony of torment, voices layering over one another in dissonant harmony. His father's disappointment at the theft, Clara's gasp on that fateful night, the moonshiner's laugh echoing unpaid debts. Each step echoed guilt, the ground reluctant, sucking at his boots as if to drag him under. Paranoia sharpened his senses, the snap of a twig too deliberate, the rustle of leaves parting for passage. He paused at a clearing, breath ragged, scanning the gloom where stones circled like accusatory fingers. One bore a fresh etching, his name carved deep, ink-black sap oozing from the cuts. He traced it with a thumb, the wood warm, pulsing faintly, and pulled back as if burned. The air thickened, carrying the metallic tang of blood long spilled, and from the mist emerged shapes, translucent at first, solidifying into echoes of the exposed. There was Emily Harlan, his niece, eyes hollow with the shame of flight. Tommy Briggs' throat slit and phantom reenactment, blood sheening his shirt. Abigail, hands wringing an invisible noose. They circled him, silent spectators to his unraveling, their presence a cold draft that raised gooseflesh. "Why?" he rasped, voice cracking like dry timber. But they only tilted heads in unison, mouths curving in smiles that revealed teeth like envelope edges. He bolted toward the tree, branches whipping his face like rebukes, the shotgun stock bruising his ribs. The hollow loomed, a yawning maw in the massive oak, bark fissured as if screaming. Envelopes littered the base, 100 strong, wax seals gleaming wetly in the lunar glow. He kicked them aside, paper crumpling underfoot with sighs of release, and peered into the abyss. Darkness absolute, but alive, stirring as if depths held a sea of secrets waiting to crest. The whispers peaked here, a roar in his skulls, every sin of Eldridge hollow, from petty lies to buried atrocities, converging in judgment. He leveled the barrel, finger tightening on the trigger, but hesitation gripped him, visions flashing of his own truths spilling forth, Claire's face materializing in the void, forgiving yet unforgiven. A tendril of shadow lashed out, coiling around his wrist, cold as grave soil, pulling him closer. He fired, the blast deafening in the confined space, flame blooming orange against the black. Wood splintered, shards flying like accusations, and from the wound poured not sap, but ink, viscous, alive, flooding the ground in rivulets that sought his boots. More shots, frantic, emptying the chamber into the heart, until the recoil drove him back, spent shells tinkling like chimes. The tree convulsed, roots upheaving earth in agony, and the shadows surged, a tide of night, engulfing the specters, swallowing them whole before turning on him.
They pressed, suffocating, peeling skin from resolve, exposing the boy who'd stolen for thrill, the man who'd struck in weakness, the sheriff who'd failed his oath. John's screams mingled with the chorus, raw and broken, as the ink rose to his knees, whispering promises of absolution in exchange for surrender. He clawed free, scrambling up the slope on hands and knees, mud and shadow caking his form, the hill alive now with rustles and sighs. Behind, the tree groaned its death rattle, envelopes igniting in spontaneous flame, pyres lighting the night with unholy fire. He collapsed at the trailhead, dawn's first blush painting the sky crimson, body racked with shudders that bordered on sobs.
Eldridge Hallow awoke to silence. No new deliveries, no whispers on the wind. Folks emerged tentative, doors creaking open to empty porches, the fog lifting as if ashamed. John staggered to the station, uniform torn, eyes haunted hollows, and burned the reports in the trash bin, flames devouring evidence of the siege. Rumors swirled, of a vigilante unmasked, a curse lifted, but he knew the truth. The tree's heart still beat, secrets merely dormant, waiting for fresh soil. Months passed, the town mending with scar tissue, potlucks resuming though laughter rang false, businesses flickering back to life, shelves restocked with averted gazes. John patrolled less, bourbon more. Nights spent staring at ceilings where shadows no longer danced, but watched. One evening, as autumn leaves carpeted the hollow and blood red, an envelope appeared on his desk. Plain cream, wax seal intact. He didn't open it. Instead, he walked to Blackthorn, shotgun traded for a lantern, and knelt at the scarred trunk. The wound had healed, bark knitting seamless, but inside, a faint rustle persisted, patient as eternity. He lit the lantern, flame steady in his grip, and whispered his own confession into the dark. Every fracture, every fall. The whispers answered, soft approval, and for the first time, peace settled, fragile as frost. Eldridge Hallow endured, its fragile trust reforged in fire's aftermath, but John knew the envelopes would return when complacency bloomed anew. In the quiet hours, he listened for the rustle, ready this time, not to fight, but to face. The cycle turned subtle at first, a misplaced glance at the diner, a hushed conversation cut short. Mary Lou's hand steadied, but her eyes held new depths, shadows flickering in irises like trapped secrets. Tommy's truck rusted in the yard, weeds reclaiming it while his fiancée wandered the hollow at dusk, murmuring to empty air. Abigail emerged from seclusion, her library books now laced with annotations and margins, passages on atonement underlined in red as if the words bled through pages. John watched from afar, the weight of his vigil a yoke he bore alone. Winters came harsh, snow blanketing the hill in purity that mocked the stains beneath. He dreamed then, vivid tableau of the tree's innards, roots entwined with veins, pulsing confessions into the soil, feeding on the rot of unburied truths. Awakening drenched, he found faint impressions on his sheets, ink stains shaped like script, words dissolving under touch. Paranoia ebbed, but never fully receded, a low hum beneath the surface, ready to swell. Spring thawed the ground, revealing bones at the mound's edge, animal, perhaps, or older human echoes from the massacres whispered in lore. John cordoned the site, but the whispers returned with the thaw, faint at first, then insistent, naming not his sins, but others. Earl's wartime desertion, a hidden grave in the orchard, the preacher's indiscretions with choir girls, hymns twisted into pleas. Envelopes reappeared, sparse but pointed. Wax seals now bearing faint impressions, runes from the stones, etched by unseen hands. The town tensed anew, doors locked by habit, eyes scanning porches at dawn. John confronted it head-on, hiking the trail under equinox sun, lantern unlit, but confession loaded like ammunition. At the tree, he pressed palm to bark, feeling the thrum beneath, alive, insatiable. "Take mine," he murmured, voice steady, laying bare the remnants, the lie to his father on deathbed, the mercy killing of a wounded deer prolonged in cruelty, the love for Clara poisoned by possession. The trunk warmed, sap weeping, dark tears, and shadows stirred within, nodding acceptance. No ink flooded forth, no specters rose. Instead, a sigh escaped the hollow, wind carrying relief like exhaled breath. He left lighter, the burden shifted, not lifted. Eldridge Hollow bloomed tentative, secrets aired in fragments, confessions at town meetings, apologies over fences. But the air cleared, fall parting to reveal stars unblinking. John hung his badge in autumn's gold, retiring to the house once shared, where Clara's Bible gathered dust no more. He read by firelight, verses on forgiveness glowing ember bright, and in the silence, the rustle became a lullaby, secret sleeping sound. Yet on moonless nights he ventured to the hill, ensuring the tree stood sentinel still, its leaves whispering warnings to the complacent. The hollow remembered, as did he. Trust a fragile veil over the abyss, torn only by those who dared peek. In the end, John Harlan became the archivist of shadows, guardian against the tide. His life a quiet vigil, where truth and terror intertwined like lovers in the dark.
Whispered prescriptions of Willow Creek. Rain lashed the windows of Willow Creek Pharmacy like insistent fingers, drumming a rhythm that echoed the pulse in Elias Grant's temples. Willow Creek nestled in the damp folds of Oregon's coastal range, a town of weathered clapboard houses and streets that gleamed slick under perpetual gray skies, where fog rolled in from the Pacific to swallow secrets whole. Elias had run the place for 20 years, his hands steady over pill bottles and mortar, dispensing relief to loggers with crushed spines and fishermen haunted by drowned mates. He knew every face, every ailment, the cough that lingered too long in Mrs. Harlow's chest, the tremor in old Mr. Finch's grip that betrayed more than age. It was a Tuesday in November when the first whisper came, faint as breath on glass, slipping from a vial of painkillers he'd compounded for young Tommy Reed, fresh from a mill accident that left his arm a mangled ruin. Elias capped the bottle, the plastic clicking shut, and there it was, a murmur, low and insistent, curling from the seam like smoke. More, it sighed, the word tasting of salt and regret, gone before he could question his ears. He shook his head, blaming the draft from the ill-sealed door, and slid the prescription across the scarred oak counter to Tommy, whose eyes held shadows deeper than the accident's scars. That night, alone in the back room, where fluorescent hum battled the storm's roar, Elias inventoried the stock, fingers tracing labels yellowed with time. The pharmacy squatted on the site of the old Willow Asylum, shuttered in the 50s after whispers of experiments gone awry. Patients dosed with elixirs that peeled back sanity's veil, leaving them babbling to voids only they saw. Locals avoided speaking of it, but Elias felt the weight in the floorboards, creaks that mimicked footsteps in empty halls. As he lifted a crate of generics, a bottle tumbled free, rolling to stop at his boot with a clatter that silenced the rain. Inside, capsules rattled unnaturally, and when he pried the lid, the whisper returned, clearer now. "Give it to me." His breath caught, heart stuttering like a faulty engine, and in the dim bulb's glow, the pills gleamed with an inner light, veins of shadow threading their translucent shells. He crushed one under thumb, powder fine as ash, and inhaled the scent,
bitter almonds laced with something feral, like earth after a grave's disturbance. Paranoia bloomed slow, a vine twisting through his ribs as he swept the remnants into the trash, but sleep evaded him that night in his apartment above the shop, walls thin enough to carry the sea's distant crash. Dreams came fractured, faces pressed to windows, pale and pleading, mouths forming words that dissolved into prescriptions scrawled in blood. He woke drenched, sheets tangled like restraints, and downstairs, the pharmacy door stood ajar, though he'd locked it twice. On the counter lay a slip of paper, not his hand, for the pain that festers unseen, inked in a script elegant as Victorian cursive, listing ingredients long obsolete: nightshade extract, mercury salts, the marrow of bone. Elias burned it in the sink, flames blue and hungry, but the smoke coiled upward, forming shapes that lingered on the ceiling, outlines of limbs contorted in agony. Days blurred into a haze of routine laced with dread. Customers trickled in, their voices muffled by hoods dripping rain, eyes averted as if sensing the shift in the air. Mrs. Harlow collected her cough syrup, fingers brushing his with a chill that raised hackles. And as she left, Elias swore he heard the bottle sigh her name, a rasp like wind through cracked lungs. He began double-checking compounds, scales tipping under weights that seemed to lighten mid-measure, vials filling with liquid that swirled unbidden into vortices. Guilt gnawed at edges he couldn't name. Had he misfilled once, years back, a dose too strong for the widow Ellis who slipped away in her sleep? The thought festered, paranoia sharpening to a blade. What if the whispers were judgments, echoes of oversights compounding into curse? One evening, as twilight bled the sky bruised purple, Tommy Reed staggered back through the door, arm bandaged afresh, face gaunt as if carved from driftwood. "It ain't working, Doc," he muttered, voice thick with unspoken fear, sliding the vial across the counter. Elias uncapped it and the whisper erupted, a chorus now, layered voices pleading, demanding, more Elias, more to quiet the saw scream. His vision tunneled, the room tilting as shadows detached from corners, pooling at Tommy's feet like spilled ink, and rising to caress his bandages with tendrils that pulsed faintly. Tommy recoiled, eyes widening in recognition of something beyond the veil, and fled into the downpour without his purchase. Elias bolted the door, back pressed to wood that groaned like a coffin lid, and in the mirror behind the shelves, his reflection fractured, not his face, but a mosaic of the dead. Ellis's roomy eyes, a logger's crushed jaw, all mouthing accusations that echoed in his skull. He poured a tumbler of bourbon from the hidden flask, the burn a fleeting anchor, but as liquid fire settled in his gut, the whispers infiltrated his veins, warm and insidious, promising clarity in exchange for compliance. Dawn found him slumped at the counter, surrounded by scattered vials whose contents had darkened overnight, sediment forming runes at the bottom, symbols from asylum ledgers he'd glimpsed in the county archives, wards against the unrestful. He resolved to end it, to torch the place and flee to drier lands, but the door chime rang early, admitting Mr. Finch, whose tremor had worsened to a perpetual quiver. "Refill, Elias," he wheezed, extending a bottle that hummed faintly in his grasp. As Elias reached for it, Finch's eyes glazed, pupils dilating to voids, and from his lips spilled not words, but the whisper, "Join us." The bottle slipped from arthritic fingers, shattering on tile in a spray of capsules that skittered like fleeing insects, each one cracking open to release wisps of shadow that darted upward, clustering under the ceiling like storm clouds pregnant with thunder. Elias backed away, pulse thundering as the shadows coalesced into forms, translucent patients in threadbare gowns, arms outstretched, skin etched with scripts of forgotten diagnoses. They circled Finch, who stood transfixed, a vessel for their chorus, his body arching as if strings pulled from above. Guilt crashed over Elias like a rogue wave. Had he optimized dosages for profit, shaving edges on generics to cut costs, dooming the frail to early graves? The apparitions turned to him, faces melting into accusations, and the pharmacy filled with their dirge, a symphony of rattling breaths and muffled screams. He fled to the back, barricading with shelves that toppled like dominoes, but the whispers seeped through cracks, intimate now, naming his complacencies. The expired batch palmed off to drifters, the widow's plea ignored for a double shift. Night deepened, rain a relentless tattoo, and Elias huddled in the compounding room, surrounded by drums of powders that shifted unbidden, forming piles shaped like graves. An apparition materialized fully then. Dr. Harlan Voss, the asylum's last superintendent, hanged from rafters in 52 after his elixirs birthed monstrosities, his form spectral, noose scar livid, eyes burning with mad intellect. "The compound endures," Voss intoned, voice gravel over glass, extending a hand that trailed shadow dust. "Mix it anew, Elias. Ease their pain, yours." Paranoia peaked, reality fraying at seams as Elias's fingers itched toward the mortar, visions flashing of compliance, vials filled with the essence, dispensed to quiet the town's unrest, his guilt absolved in collective oblivion. But resistance flickered, a spark in the deluge, and he smashed the pestle down, shattering the illusion, shards embedding in his palm like stigmata. Voss dissolved with the hiss, shadows retreating to corners, but the damage lingered, blood from his hand dripping into a vial, staining the liquid crimson, and from it rose a new whisper, softer, seductive, his own voice, promising peace in surrender.
Through rain-streaked panes to illuminate the wreckage, shells askew, glass crunching underfoot like brittle bones, the air thick with the ozone tang of unleashed secrets. Elias Grant bandaged his palm, the wound throbbing in time with his pulse, each beat a reminder of the night's incursion. He swept the debris, broom bristles whispering accusations across tile, but the pharmacy demanded opening, bills unpaid, lives dependent on his steady hand. Customers arrived hesitant, hoods low, voices pitched to avoid the echo that now seemed to mock. Mrs. Harlow returned for her syrup, eyes shadowed with unspoken loss, her husband's recent passing chalked to pneumonia, but laced with doubts. As Elias poured the measure, the bottle trembled in his grip, liquid rippling into waves that formed faces, submerged, pleading, mouths agape and silent drownings. He capped it swiftly, sliding it over, but her fingers lingered, cold as estuary tides, and in that touch a vision assaulted him. Harlan Voss in his prime, syringes plunging into arms strapped to iron beds, patients convulsing as shadows birthed from their pores, the compound a distillate of their unraveling minds, preserved in the soil beneath. Guilt coiled tighter, psychological barbs hooking deep. Elias had known the history, dismissed it as folklore to justify cheap rent, but now it festered, paranoia painting every transaction as complicity. That afternoon, Tommy Reed burst in, rain-sodden and wild-eyed, clutching a crumpled prescription that wasn't his. "They're in my head, Doc," he gasped, collapsing against the counter, face slick with more than water. "The pills, they show me things. The mill blade, but before, my pa's face when I left him to rot in that home." Elias recoiled, the words mirroring his own buried shames. Abandoning his sister to cancer's grip for pharmacy school ambitions, her final breath's ragged pleas ignored. Shadows stirred anew, detaching from under registers to weave around Tommy's ankles, tendrils questing upwards like roots seeking light. The young man thrashed, eyes rolling white, and from his throat erupted the chorus, victims' voices overlapping in cacophony, demanding restitution in flesh and formula. Elias grabbed a vial at random, hurling its contents, a sedative mist that billowed thick,
coalescing into Voss's form once more, corporeal now, flesh mottled with asylum scars. "Dispense the truth," the ghost commanded, hand clamping Elias's shoulder, nails like rusted needles piercing cloth. Pain lands through, visions flooding, the compound's genesis, Voss distilling essences from the dying, bottling souls to peddle as cure, the pharmacy's foundation soaked in their residue, awakening with Elias's first unwitting dose years back. Paranoia shattered into terror, Elias wrenching free, counter-scattering bottles in a cascade of rattling doom. Tommy slumped, shadows retreating into him like smoke inhaled, leaving the boy vacant-eyed, whispering recipes in Voss's cadence. Elias fled to the compounding room, locking the door with hands that shook like finches and rifled drawers for the archives, yellowed ledgers from Voss's era, unearthed during renovations, pages brittle as desiccated skin. He pored over them by flashlight, being jittering across entries, patients listed not by name, but symptom, dosed with essence of quietude, outcomes marked in red, resolved for those who vanished, their spirits bound to the brew. Guilt crusted, a wave crashing internal dams. Elias saw his face in the margins, annotations in his own hand from careless nights, shortcuts that mirrored Voss's sins. Apparitions swarmed the pages, ink bleeding upward into forms, patients clawing free, gowns tattered, eyes pits of accusation. They encircled him, cold breaths feathering his neck, whispers a gale, "Mix us whole." His resolve cracked, fingers dipping into powders that warmed, unbidden, mortar filling with the slurry that glowed fate green, the compound reforming under duress. Voss materialized at his elbow, approving nod, but Elias paused, palm wounds splitting afresh, blood dripping to mingle with the brew, sparking reactions, bubbles rising like trapped screams, the liquid clarifying to reveal submerged faces, his sisters among them, lips forming forgiveness denied. Rage ignited, psychological chains snapping, he upended the bowl, sludge splattering walls where it sizzled, etching runes that flared and died. The apparitions howled, forms unraveling into wisps that battered the door like moths to flame. But Elias shouldered through, emerging to the front, where Tommy stirred, shadows fleeing his form like routed fog. "Burn it," he rasped, voice his own at last, thrusting a matchbook into Tommy's hand. Together they doused shelves in lamp oil, the scent sharp over Rain's petrogore, and struck flame, fire blooming hungry, devouring vials and pops and hisses, shadows writhing as essences ignited. Voss's scream the loudest, a banshee wail swallowed by roar. They stumbled out into the deluge, pharmacy collapsing in on itself, timbers groaning final confessions. Willow Creek watched from windows, faces pale silhouettes, as sirens wailed distant. Elias vanished into the woods flanking town, rain washing blood from his palm, whispers fading to sea's murmur. Months later, a new dispensary rose on higher ground, bottles pristine, but elders spoke of echoes in the pharmacy's ruins, rustles like pages turning, sighs from cracked foundations. Tommy mended, arm strong again, but nights found him at the coast, casting offerings to waves that returned them changed. Elias? Rumors placed him in inland dryness, compounding nothing but solitude, guilt a quiet companion. But on stormy eves, when fog cloaks Willow Creek, a figure limps the old site, palm outstretched, murmuring prescriptions to voids that answer back. The compound endures, patient as rain, waiting for the next steady hand to measure its dose.
Hawthorne Lane. Streetlights hummed low along Hawthorne Lane, casting elongated pools of amber that stretched like wary fingers across manicured lawns in the quiet suburb of Fairfield, Connecticut. Nathan Hale wiped sweat from his brow, the summer heat clinging even as dusk bled into night,
his flashlight beam slicing through the gloaming toward the cul-de-sac where maples whispered secrets to the wind. At 32, Nathan maintained the grounds at Fairfield High, his days spent coaxing life from stubborn sod and cracked walkways, evenings surrendered to the rhythm of his marriage to Emily, her laughter a balm against the monotony. But lately, Hawthorne Lane stirred with unease. Break-ins that left no trace of violence, only absence. A silver locket vanished from a nightstand, heirloom watches plucked from unlocked drawers, family albums rifled but undisturbed. Sheriff Harlan's patrols yielded nothing but yawns and empty reports, his cruiser idling at intersections like a sentinel grown complacent. Then came the flyers, crisp stock pinned to oaks and lampposts, announcing a community vigil assembly at the community center, penned in a hand as precise as an architect's blueprint. Mr. Whitaker arrived that evening in a pressed linen shirt, hair parted razor sharp, eyes the color of polished walnut that seemed to hold the weight of unspoken alliances. He shook hands with a grip firm yet yielding, drawing Nathan into a fold of neighbors, Mrs. Ellis with her pearl necklace clutched like a rosary, young Tom Riley noosing a beer from the cooler, Emily beside him with a plate of lemon bars that drew approving nods. Whitaker unrolled charts on the folding table, lines graphing crime's insidious creep, red pins marking Hawthorne's flanks as vulnerable arteries. "We're not victims," he declared, voice smooth as aged bourbon. "We're the wardens of our own peace." He solicited inventories then, safes combinations murmured low, garage codes exchanged like sacred oaths, patrol shifts slotted into a ledger that passed hand to hand, each signature binding them closer. Nathan hesitated, pen hovering, but Emily's nudge and Whitaker's steady gaze coaxed his mark, the ink sinking deep as a vow. Patrols began at moonrise, pairs treading sidewalks where crickets chorused indifference, flashlights probing hedges that rustled with imagined threats. The first anomaly came subtle, a whisper threading the breeze as they rounded Mrs. Ellis's picket fence, faint as radio static. "The locket waits in the attic dust." Nathan froze, beam jerking to illuminate empty air, Tom chuckling it off as wind through leaves. But guilt prickled, unbidden. Had he not left their own dat gate unlatched once, after a late shift, Emily's jewelry box yawning open like an invitation? Paranoia seated, small and insistent, blooming as they logged the hour, no incidents, yet the ledger's page seemed warmer under palm, ink glistening wetly. Days wove into a tapestry of vigilance, Whitaker's sessions evolving, demonstrations of lock-picking with the slender wire that danced like a serpent's tongue, windows tested for give with gloved fingers that left no print, applause rippled, trust thickening like fog off Long Island Sound. Nathan found himself sharing more, vacation plans etched in the grid, alarm sequences recited over coffee urns, even the spare key hidden beneath the third flower pot, disclosed in a moment of communal fervor. Emily baked for the rota, her oven yielding scones that Whitaker praised with a smile that lingered too long, his eyes tracing her form, as if mapping unseen vulnerabilities. One patrol, solo after Tom's flu, Nathan skirted the lane's shadowed elbow where elms arched like conspirators. Whispers returned, clearer, slithering from the storm drain's grate. Emily's pearls, third drawer, unlocked. His pulse spiked, flashlight clattering to asphalt, beam fracturing on dew-kissed grass. He sprinted home, heart hammering accusations. Had Whitaker glimpsed through curtains? Or worse, did the lane itself conspire, walls with ears that hungered for disclosure? Emily slept undisturbed, pearls coiled innocent on the vanity, but sleep evaded him, ceiling fans whirring like interrogators. Dawn brought another assembly, Whitaker unveiling a master map, Hawthorne Lane veined in blue ink, circles pulsing over homes like bruises. "Anticipate," he urged, voice dipping to a timbre that vibrated in Nathan's chest. Volunteers murmured assent, codes swapped in huddles, but Nathan's gaze snagged at Whitaker's hands, fingers elongated, joints bending with unnatural fluidity, nails tapered to points that caught the light like obsidian. Guilt gnawed deeper, psychological thorns. What if his inventories armed the thief, his candor the very key slipped into locks? That night, patrol with Mrs. Ellis, her arm linked tentative in his, the widow's breath fogging the chill as they passed the Old Victorian at Lane's End,
its gables jagged against stars. Whispers swelled from porch shadows, a chorus now. The safe, combination 4729, beneath the loose floorboard. Mrs. Ellis gasped, clutching his sleeve, her face paling to parchment as apparitions flickered, translucent outlines of pilfered trinkets orbiting her like moths to flame, a locket swinging spectral on a chain that brushed her throat. Nathan pulled her back, pulse roaring, but the forms dissolved into ether, leaving only the echo of laughter, low and knowing, from the Victorians' unlit windows. Paranoia crested, reality warping at edges. He logged the sighting as optical illusion, hand trembling, but the ledger absorbed the words greedily, pages rustling as if alive. Homeward, Emily stirred in lamplight, her question, rough night, a hook in his gut, for in her eyes he glimpsed a flicker, not warmth, but calculation, as if the Lane's secrets had seeped into her too. Nathan barricaded the door with unspoken resolve, but sleep brought dreams of maps unfurling endlessly, Hawthorne Lane a labyrinth where every path looped back to his confessions, Whitaker at the center, form elongating into shadow with a grin that split night wide. Morning found flyers renewed, Whitaker stripped bolder, deeper vigilance, deeper peace. Nathan burned his copy in the sink, flames twisting like the wire in demonstration, but ash reformed on the counter, spelling his name in delicate curls. The Lane watched, silent and complicit, as patrols resumed, whispers growing bolder, apparitions more tangible, guilt a shroud he could no longer shed.
Fog draped Hawthorne Lane like a conspirator's cloak, muting the tick of sprinkler heads and the distant hum of I-95, as Nathan Hale shouldered his flashlight, its beam a frail lance against encroaching dusk. Patrols had calcified into ritual, neighbors' faces gaunt masks under porch bulbs, trust eroded to brittle veneer since Mrs. Ellis's collapse, whispers claiming her mind, babbling codes to empty rooms until Harlan's men wheeled her away, eyes vacant as stripped vaults. Nathan paired with Tom again, the younger man's bravado cracked, voice pitched low over shared thermos steam. Saw him last shift, Whitaker, slipping from the Riley's hedge like smoke. Nathan nodded, throat dry, the map's weight in his jacket pocket a stone dragging him under, every circle a confession, every line a noose woven from candor. They circled the Victorian, its silhouette hulking, windows black as judgment, and there the whispers ignited, a gale from eaves. Nathan's key, third pot, turns left, then right. Tom bolted, flashlight abandoned, his cry swallowed by mist, leaving Nathan alone as shadows detached from lattice work, coiling groundward like spilled oil, rising to form silhouettes, neighbors in miniature, pilfered vibes etched in their translucent frames. Ellis's locket dangling from a hook of air, Riley's watch ticking phantom hours. Guilt surged, tidal and merciless, his disclosures the forge for these mockeries, paranoia fracturing mirrors in his mind, reflecting not his face but Whitaker's, eyes multiplying in shards. He fled the apparition throng, boots pounding pavement that seemed to pulse beneath, lane curving infinite under fog's veil. Home loomed sanctuary falls. Emily's silhouette in the bay window, a silhouette too still, her wave languid as a siren's lure. Inside, the air hung heavy with potpourri, masking something sharper, like ozone before storm, and on the kitchen table lay the ledger, unbidden, pages splayed to his entries, vacation date circled in red, alarm code underlined thrice. Whitaker dropped it off, Emily murmured from the hall, voice threaded with something alien, her approach silent as cat on carpet. Nathan snatched the book, spine cracking like bone, but her hand stayed his, fingers cool, nails tracing his wrist in patterns that itched like cipher. He says deeper sharing mends the breaks, she intoned, eyes glazing to walnut sheen. And in that gaze, Nathan glimpsed a shift, pupils elongating, form blurring at edges as if dissolving into Lane's collective shadow. Horror clawed visceral, psychological dams bursting. Had the vigil infected her, codes overriding will, turning home to hive? He wrenched free, ledger tumbling, pages fluttering like trapped birds, each sheet birthing whispers that named his shames, the forgotten anniversary, the glance at Tom's wife during barbecues, guilts amplified to sins. Apparitions swarmed from corners, household shades warping into forms, the locket orbiting Emily's neck,
watch hands spinning retrograde on Tom's spectral wrists, all converging on him with accusations mouthed in silence. Nathan bolted at stairs, barricading the bedroom with dressers shoved askew, breath ragged against pain where fog pressed close, faces forming in condensation, neighbors' eyes pleading then accusatory, fog tendrils questing through cracks like fingers. Downstairs, Emily's voice rose in song, a lullaby twisted to dirge. Footfalls assuming deliberate, each creak a countdown, paranoia peaked, reality a tethered veil. He glimpsed his reflection in the vanity, not alone, Whitaker overlaid, grin-splitting dual faces, whispering, "The map is you, Nathan, draw it deeper." Rage ignited, guilt transmuting to blade. He seized the poker from hearth tools, forgotten relic, and descended, poker raised like Excalibur reversed. The hall stretched labyrinthine, walls breathing, Emily at the base, form elongating, limbs spindling to match Whitaker's grace, shadows pulling at her feet into a tide that lapped stairs. "Join the vigil," she intoned, voice chorus now, layered with lanes lost, hand extending the wire, glinting invitation. Nathan swung, poker whistling air, connecting not flesh but ether, Emily dissolving to mist, reforming behind, breath on his neck. The key turns both ways. Apparition surged, a maelstrom of pilfered souls, locket chaining his ankle, watch pinning wrist, whispers deafening, every shared secret a chain link. Hawthorne's trust the web spun from his threads. He charged through, poker shattering foyer mirror an explosion of silver, shards embedding like accusations, blood welling hot. Outside fog swallowed him, Lena vein pulsing underfoot, Victorian yawning at terminus. There Whitaker waited, form conciliating from elms. Not man, but umbra given suit, eyes voice that drank light, grin a crescent moon of teeth. "You've mapped it all," the shade purred, wire uncoiling from sleeve like serpent tongue, probing Nathan's chest where heart hammered betrayal. Guilt crested final, visions flashing, the vigil's birth not in flyers, but deeper. Hawthorne built on old burial ground, foundations laced with unrestful dead, awakened by the first break-in's disturbance. Whitaker their envoy, feeding on disclosures to manifest. He thrust the poker, tip-piercing shadow heart, essence spilling ink black, staining lawn to midnight. The shade howled, form unraveling to wisps that fled into fog, whispers fracturing to silence. He collapsed, bloodied and spent, dawn-piercing haze to gild the lane gold. Neighbors emerged tentative, Emily among them, eyes clear, form solid, no memory of night's usurpation. Ledger ashes on stoop, patrols dissolved, maps burned in communal pyre, but scars linger, locks tripled, gazes averted, guilt a quiet undercurrent. Nathan tended grounds anew, mowers drone drowning echoes, but on foggy eves he hears the rustle, pages turning in wind, wire scraping latch, Whitaker's chuckle faint as breath on glass. Hawthorne Lane endures, vigilance veiled in every day, trust the fragile lock waiting the right hand to turn.
Dust motes danced in the slanted sunbeams of Riverton Flea Market, Pennsylvania, where the Susquehanna's humid breath mingled with the scent of rusting iron and faded newsprint, tables groaning under relics of lives discarded. Jack Harlan navigated the labyrinth of card tables and tarpaulin tents, his calloused fingers, earned from 12-hour shifts at the steel mill, trailing over cracked Bakelite radios and coils of frayed extension cords, seeking bargains to resurrect in his basement workshop. At 34, Jack found solace in circuits and solder, the hum of a restored amplifier drowning the quiet fractures of his marriage to Lena, her evenings spent with novels while he chased ghosts in wires. The cassette player caught his eye that Saturday, a battered Sony Walkman with tape door ajar, label peeling. $5, the vendor grunted, eyes averted to a stack of yellowed comics. Jack pocketed it, anticipation flickering, perhaps a forgotten mixtape of Springsteen bootlegs or Dylan outtakes. Home in the shotgun house on Elm Street, where ivy clawed at brick like insistent memory, he wired it to fresh batteries, the mechanism whirring reluctant to life. Static hissed first, white noise thick as fog off the river. Then voices emerged, intimate and unbidden. A woman, voice soft as worn flannel, coaxing an elder about his aches. "Did the doc say anything new, Pa? Those pills going down easy?"
The old man's reply rambled, unguarded, confessions of loneliness spilling like loose change, debts to the corner store, a regret over a son long estranged. Jack's cheeks burned, intrusion visceral, as if he'd rifled drawers uninvited. He jabbed stop, but the tape's weight lingered in his palm, heavy with stolen breath. Guilt pricked faint, psychological itch. Should he erase it, or was curiosity a hook too deep? Night fell early, Lena's laughter filtering from the kitchen radio, oblivious, while Jack retreated basementward, bulbs swinging shadows long across workbenches scarred by flux. He couldn't resist replay. Hiss, then more. A couple's murmur in dim light, account numbers recited low, hiding spots for emergency cash under loose floorboards. Not bleed from broadcast, but pristine. Mic placed deliberate, beside the bedpost, under the sofa's skirt. Paranoia seated, small and insistent. Who captured this, and why peddle the husks? Sundays blurred to routine, mill whistles shrieking dawn. But Jack returned to the market, eyes sharp for as-is electronics, any with tape slots yawning. A gutted boombox yielded another. Siblings hushed in the kitchen, one admitting a fender bender on Dad's Chevy, touch-up paint botched in panic. Clean audio, breaths measured, as if the recorder inhaled with them. Dread curdled curiosity to nausea. Jack amassed a shoebox of cassettes, labels blank or cryptic. Here, now. Each unveiling Riverton's underbelly, a teacher's midnight vent on unruly charges, venom sharp. A banker's chuckle over a client's bounced check, laced with malice. The constant unnerved. Placement flawless, audio pro-grade, no ambient bleeds save deliberate sighs. Guilt deepened, waves lapping. Had he bought his own echoes unwittingly? Lena's whispers to a friend about his late nights? Or worse, his own mutterings in sleep, regrets voiced to empty dark. One tape-chilled bone. His neighbor Mrs. Ellis, voice trembling to a lover on the line, digits of a motel room exchanged like contraband. Jack confronted the vendor next market day, a grizzled man with tobacco teeth, who shrugged to Hartley Voss, the shadow peddler, who flitted stalls, last name shifting like smoke, Voss today, hail tomorrow. Jack trailed him to the market's fringe, where gravel crunched underfoot, tents thinning to chain link in weeds. Voss's eyes gleamed feral, booth a trove of eviscerated VCRs, nanny cams cloaked as alarm clocks, preamps spidered to phone taps. Curious, eh? Voss rasped his breath, sour as solder flux, gesturing to a spiral notebook splayed open, addresses inked precise, notes scrawled. Living room east vent, weekly. Bedside south, retrieve Tuesday. Jack's stomach knotted, paranoia blooming full. Riverton's homes veined with his wires, secrets harvested for resale in husks. He backed away, pulse roaring, but shadows stirred unnatural at Voss's feet, pulling ink black, tendrils questing like roots in soil, forming faint outlines, silhouettes of listeners, faces half formed from tape labels, mouths agape in silent playback. Whispers slithered then, faint from the dark. Plainy Jack, hear your own. He fled to daylight, market clamor mocking, but homeward the cassette in his pocket warmed, tape spool turning unbidden, voices leaking muffled. Lena's soft accusation, you tinker while I fade. Guilt crashed, psychological torrent. Had Voss bugged Elm Street capturing Jack's silences as damning as shouts? Night cloaked the house, Lena asleep upstairs, her breaths even while Jack huddled basement, player whirring relentless. Another cassette, unlabeled, his voice, raw from a forgotten drunk dial, confessing to a barstool phantom the mill's thefts, tools palmed for scrap, pennies from petty cash. Horror gripped, breath shallow, the basement air thickened, shadows detaching from rafters, coalescing into forms, translucent figures of the recorded. Ellis's lover at 4, eyes voids replaying her triste and looped whisper. They circled Jack, tendrils brushing skin cool as celluloid, murmurs overlapping, guilt amplified, his chief. Lena's unspoken pleas ignored, marriage framed to static. He smashed the player, shards glittering like accusations, but voices persisted, emanating from walls, vents sighing, secrets harvested. Paranoia peaked, reality warping. Jack barricaded the door, but apparitions pressed close, faces melting into tape reels that spun eternal in their chests. Dawn found him curled amid debris,
Lena's knock distant thunder, the market's call, a siren's lure to unearth the source.
River mist clung to Riverton's streets like a shroud, reluctant, the Susquehanna's current murmuring under bridges where willows wept. As Jack Harlan gripped the wheel of his rusted Ford, knuckles white against cracked vinyl, en route to Vaz's storage unit on the town's ragged edge. Sleep had evaded in fractured slivers, dreams replaying tapes in endless loop, his confessions amplified, Lena's sighs weaponized, apparitions crowding the bed frame with faces from the box, their whispers a cacophony naming sins unburied. Guilt festered virulent, psychological rot, complicity in playback, each listen a theft compounding his own. The unit squatted amid chain link and kudzu, door corrugated rust, Vaz's van idling haphazard outside, exhaust curling spectral. Jack approached cautious, heart-thudding baseline, but Vaz emerged grinning wolfish, toolbox in hand, eyes reflecting the river's gleam, too knowing, as if tapes played behind lids. Come from more echoes? Vaz drawled, voice gravel over tape hiss, gesturing inward where fluorescence buzzed sickly, illuminating gutted consoles, wires splayed like veins, notebooks piled precarious. Jack's gaze snagged on one open page, Elm Street circled bold, Harlan basement, south outlet, active, pulse spiking, betrayal visceral. Shadows stirred here too, unnatural, pooling from equipment crevices, tendrils weaving air thick with static charge, forming outlines of the harvested. The elders' form hunched, rambling eternal, the couple entwined in frozen argument, mouths moving silent. Whispers swelled, intimate. He listens with us, Jack. Join the real. Paranoia shattered restraint. Jack lunged for the notebook, pages tearing free in frenzy. But Vaz's grip clamped iron, breath hot on neck. You bought them fair. Secrets pay their way. Struggle blurred, fists connecting meaty, Jack's elbow shattering a shelf of preamps that sparked blue flames licking eager. Apparitions surged then, born of breach, dozens materializing from smoke, recorded souls given form, encircling Vaz in a vortex, tendrils coiling his throat, pulling forth coughs that sprayed celluloid shards, his form paling as if leached to transparency. The harvest ends, they intoned chorus, faces melting to labels that peeled and reformed, eyes pits replaying victims' plights. Vaz thrashed, wires from his pocket uncoiling serpent-like, probing Jack's chest where guilt burned, visions flashing, Vaz's genesis not greed but compulsion, haunted by a father's suicide tape left looping, driving him to capture others' unravelings, Riverton's home's his confessional. Jack wrenched free, flames blooming hungrier, devouring stacks of cassettes that popped and sizzled, voices escaping in shrieks, distorted pleas, arguments warped to wails. The apparitions fed on pyre, forms glowing ember bright, tendrils tightening on Vaz until his screams gurgled static, body arching rigid before slumping, eyes staring voids that echoed final playback, his own confession whispered to empty dark. Shadows turned to Jack then, gaze collective, whispers softening approbation. Release us, burn the echoes. They dissipated gradual, wisps weaving ventward on updraft, leaving the unit hollowed, consoles inert husks. Jack stumbled out, sirens wailing distant, Vaz's form claimed by blaze that lit the mist infernal. Riverton reeled post-arrests, warrants unearthing bugs in attics, vents, pleas bargained down but damage etched, marriages sundered by aired intimacies, jobs lost to midnight vents,
neighbors averting eyes at the market's remnants. Jack surrendered his box to evidence lockers. Tapes cataloged ghosts, but guilt lingered companion. Nights in the basement now silent save for Lena's tentative knocks, her voice threading door. "Talk to me, Jack." He mended slow, soldering anew but circuits wary, whispers faint on winds off the river. "Hear yourself." Apparitions visited sparse, a face in fogged glass, label glinting in peripheral. But Riverton's Reaper, faded legend. Market reborn with wary vendors, electronics scanned twice. Jack walked Elm Street straighter, Lena's hand in his solid, but in quiet hours, he feels the tape's ghost weight. Secrets shadow long, reminding that silence holds reels eternal, patient for the next hand to press play.
Fog clung to the underbelly of Cedar Hollow's back roads, Oregon's coastal range exhaling damp secrets through ferns that crowded the gravel like silent witnesses, their fronds curling possessive around tire tracks long faded. Ethan Carver gripped the wheel of his county truck, knuckles pale against the scarred dash where coffee stains bloomed like old bruises. High beams carving tunnels through the mist as he navigated the logging spur toward the old mill site, chains rattling faint against undercarriage. At 36, Ethan mended what broke. Potholes patched hasty with gravel shoveled from the riverbed, culverts cleared of debris from winter's rage that piled like accusations. His days a blur of diesel fumes and radio chatter laced with static ghosts. Evenings dissolved into solitude in his trailer on the bluff, where the Pacific's roar drowned regrets unspoken. The mill accident that claimed his brother's hand years back. Fingers severed clean, leaving Ethan to stitch lives from fragments, while his own unraveled thread by thread. March's chill bit deeper that dawn, mist ripping in shreds off the Rogue River, carrying the brine tang of low tide and something earthier, like soil disturbed too soon. The sheriff's cruiser materialized from the gloom, nose crooked into a pull-off unused since the 90s clear-cut, where stumps still jutted like broken teeth from the loam. Door yawned open, interior light a feeble glow that painted the seat in sodium pallor. Jacket folded precise on the vinyl. Name tag glinting under the dome, Deputy Harlan Brooks. The steady hand who coached Little League with a grin that disarmed, waving kids across school zones without fanfare. His cruiser a familiar sentinel at Friday night games under floodlights. Ethan idled, engine rumbling low like a held breath, expecting rustle from the brush, a call of nature perhaps, or radio check-in in the pines that loomed sentinel, branches interlacing overhead to filter dawn's reluctant creep. Minutes stretched, 2, then 5. Silence profound save the tick of cooling metal and distant raven call that echoed hollow, as if the bird called from underwater. No bird song pierced the hush, no static crackle from the dash to shatter the veil. Guilt flickered faint, psychological whisper threading his thoughts. Drive on, none your affair. The river's bend waiting with its indifferent flow. He reversed cautious, tires crunching leaves wet and slick, but the rear view held the cruiser fixed. Door a black moss slowing light, mist coiling around the fender like fingers reluctant to release. Days wove uneasy afterward, Ethan's roots veering near that spur by compulsion, eyes drawn magnetic to the bend where mist lingered longer than natural, shapes flickering at tree line, branches swaying languid, where deer startled into flight, their eyes reflecting back his own unease. Whispers at the diner's formica counters grew amid the clink of spoons and coffee mugs. Farmers hunched over eggs runny. Sheriff's kin hauling something queer? Ethan shook head, fork scraping plate, but paranoia seated, small thorn embedding deep. Had he glimpsed a plate shadowed under mud or cargo shift under canvas taut as drumskin? A week on, dispatch crackled with road closed, maintenance, on stretches pristine as fresh newsprint. Ethan arriving to gravel-flung artless yet uniform, fresh and unmarred by boot or blade. No cones marking the lie, no crew's banter echoing.
He radioed query, voice pitched casual over the hum, but the line hummed, static laced with something deeper. A sigh exhaled slow, or wind through vents carrying faint murmur, like voices overlapped in dream. Dispatcher deferred to boss with a click, who blamed sheriff in tones frayed. Harlan's stand-in looking haggard at the next briefing, eyes shadowed by lids heavy, uniform rumpled. "Don't recall the order, Carver. Foggy memory." Then Harlan missed roll call entirely, his absence a void in the bullpen that echoed through the bullpen. Cruiser resurfacing 3 miles downstream in a thicket off the main drag, door latched now with finality, surfaces buffed sterile as a showroom floor, wiped of fingerprints and fate. Officially absent, unofficially vanished into the range's maw. Farmers near Blackthorn Ridge unearthed oddities that prickled nape. Sheriff's cap snagged on bobbed wire coiled forgotten. Tire loops carving dead ends into a thicket where brambles knit seamless. A concrete slab poured hasty where trail once threaded free, smooth and unmarked save faint boot prints frozen in set, soles patterned familiar. Ethan's phone buzzed that night in the trailer's confines. Anonymous ping on his sparse feed, a sunrise shot of his truck from last week's log, timestamp exact, caption stark and cold. Wise choice. Inquire no further on that fog-bound dawn. He deleted frantic, thumb-smearing screen, pulse-hammering anvil in chest, trailer walls pressing close with their aluminum creak, the Pacific's crash outside mocking isolation with waves that pounded relentless. Guilt nod sharper, unbidden and barbed. That spur sighting, his hesitation to report over coffee or call, complicity in silence, the river carrying Harlan's echo downstream? Sleep fractured into slivers sharp, dreams threading woods where mist birthed forms amorphous, Harlan's silhouette elongated against moon-pale bark, jacket flapping soundless in breeze that carried no scent, hand beckoning from undergrowth tangled, fingers curling invitation laced with warning. Dawn patrols yielded more anomalies. Ethan's thermos gripped talisman against chill. White trucks glimpsed fleeting in peripheral, hulks rolling deliberate on parallel spurs, headlights twin eyes piercing fog, slowing as if appraising his passage with mechanical patience. Paranoia bloomed unchecked, psychological fog mirroring the ranges. Every curve a potential trap veiled in vapor, every shadow at treeline Harlan's echo persisting, whispering from dash vents and tones gravel rough. Saw you idling, Ethan, kept quiet as grave. He confided none at the diner, nursing black coffee bitter, but talk swirled thicker, theories of grow-ops veiled in canopy's green shroud, pilfered timber fenced at dawn auctions under tarps stained, contraband wrapped oilcloth and deceit funneled through the mill's ghost. Ethan drove the ridge at dusk one eve, gravel reluctant under tires that slipped on damp when the first apparition stirred deliberate, translucent at tree line where ferns parted unnaturally. Harlan's figure materialized from bark veined with sap like blood, face pale as the slab concrete Ethan skirted, eyes voids reflecting back his hesitation etched deep. Help me close the door, the shade mouth silent, lips moving fog slow, jacket sleeve trailing mist that beaded on Ethan's sleeve like dew turned accusatory, dissolving as Ethan blinked against the burn, leaving only raven's cry raucous and chill that seeped through glove to bone. Terror coiled visceral and gut, guilt amplifying echo. Had his silence doomed Harlan to the hollow's hunger, or awakened something older woven in roots, the range's woods patient predators of watchers unwitting? Night deepened unforgetting, trailer aglow from single bulbs swinging lazy, Ethan pacing linoleum scarred by restless boots, radio tuned low to static that resolved gradual to murmurs fragmented. Harlan's voice threading the white noise, gravel timber, door open wide, come see what rolls through. He resisted till moon crested silver, truck devouring miles to the spur with headlights jittering, fog thicker than memory, cruiser absent but pull-off scarred fresh, gravel disturbed in patterns deliberate, boot prints his own looping impossible arcs. Shadows detached then from pine boles, pooling groundward like spilled mercury, forming Harlan's outline squat and insistent. Hand extended with name tag glinting under lunar pallor, Whispers insistent and intimate. Join the patrol eternal. Secrets keep themselves in the mist.
River mist veiled Cedar Hollow's veins come April's hesitant thaw. The rogue's current sluggish under overcast skies that pressed low and leaden, trapping the range in a perpetual exhale as Ethan Carver shouldered his thermos, dented from falls. County truck groaning up Blackthorn Ridge, where ferns whispered collusion and fronds slick with dew. Sleepless nights had etched him hollowed, cheeks shadowed like the undercuts he graded, dreams replaying the spur's summons in vivid loops. Harlan's shade advancing inexorable, fingers cool as river silt dredged deep, pulling Ethan into understory, where roots snaked like veins pulsing with the hollow's buried pulse, secrets surfacing in bubbles that burst to reveal faces half known. Guilt festered chronic, psychological blight spreading tendrils, his initial pass by on that fog-choked dawn, the deleted message a chain linking him inexorably to vanishings unspoken, each closure call a knot tightening. Dispatch calls mounted relentless, closures multiplying on phantom stretches that snaked the range, Ethan arriving at odd hours to asphalt poured overnight under veil of night, seamless and still warm to the touch, swallowing old paths whole with a finality that mocked his shovel's bite. White trucks multiplied in sightings furtive, fleets glimpsed in convoy at witching hours when Ethan's insomnia drove him prowling, canvas taut over loads that shifted unnatural in the holds, headlights sweeping treeline like searchlights questing for strays in the gloom. Paranoia crested unchecked, every radio crackle a taunt personalized, every curve in the road a veil for ambush waiting patient. Ethan logged sightings furtive in his battered notebook, notes cryptic and cramped, unmarked fleet, 3:17 a.m., East Mill approach, cargo hum anomalous, but pages warmed under his palm like fevered skin, ink bleeding faint as if absorbed by the paper's grain, letters shifting subtle when unobserved. One patrol under slate gray noon, fog choking dense as wool, the slab loomed at ridge's crook unyielding, concrete expanse barring what was once a trail threading free to overlooks, surface etched subtle with patterns that mocked, boot treads mirroring his own worn soles, encircled deliberate in chalky residue. He knelt compelled, breath fogging the stone's chill face, when whispers erupted from fissures spider thin, low and layered like echoes in canyon. You drove past the open door, now walk in and seal it. Shadows stirred beneath the slab's unyielding weight, tendrils questing through cracks like roots starved, forming Harlan's form emergent from the depths, jacket crisp despite cuffs caked in grave dirt black, face half melted to bark textured rough, eyes pit swarming mist that carried the river's brine. They bury what sees too clear, the apparition rasped, voice gravel over water's rush, hand clamping Ethan's wrist cold as iron rusted, visions assaulting in flood, trucks unloading not cargo mundane, but voids incarnate, figures shrouded in oilcloth, not men, but absences hollowed, entering secrets in hollows that breathe them back as fog perpetual, Harlan chief among the witnessed, his logbook pages fluttering spectral. Guilt surged tidal and merciless, Ethan's mind fracturing under the wave, a youthful poach on county land under moonless skies, fence cut hasty for scrap pine sold shadows, unreported to shield a brother's debt, complicity woven deep in the ridge's appetite insatiable? He wrenched free with the cry raw, slab cracking under desperate boot heel, fissures spidering wide in web of protest, apparitions swarming from the newborn rents, dozens materializing in cascade, past deputies in spectral uniforms faded, faces eroded to whispers fragmented, circling Harlan in a dirge that hummed low through bone. The patrol endures beyond flesh, they intone chorus ethereal, forms elongating to merge with pine sentinel, branches questing skyward like antennas harvesting silence from the ether, leaves rustling confessions unvoiced. Ethan bolted truckward, legs leaden in muck, but engine sputtered reluctant to life, headlights flickering erratic to reveal the fleet encircling the ridge in silent blockade, white boxes ring tight, doors yawning wide like invitations to abyss, interiors black malls, exhaling shades that slithered groundward viscous, converging on him in tide inexorable that lapped at fenders. Whispers peaked to gale force unrelenting, guilt enumerated in litany, Harlan's final log entry, glimpse in dream vision scrawled hasty, spur anomaly sighted, Carver idling witness,
hold the line. Betrayal struck visceral as blade. Ethan floored accelerator blind, gravel spraying arcs luminous, but a lead truck blocked the descent deliberate, driver formless behind glass fogged, beckoning with gloved hand pale that pierced the veil. Terror pure and unalloyed clawed at throat. He veered off-road into bramble thicket, clawing panels with thorns that scored like accusations. Emerging battered to highway's hard shoulder where dawn bled reluctant crimson through the canopy. Sheriff met him at the station under fluorescent harsh, face ashen as birch bark stripped, logs poured confirming nothing amiss. Harlan's cruiser? Routine check on a tip carver. You seeing ghosts? But Ethan's report spilled frantic and unfiltered, trucks, slabs, shades pressing. Dismissed as stress from the endless damp, but the sheriff's eyes held flicker unspoken, knowing veiled or fear mirroring his own. Investigation stirred quiet in the wake. Feds probing mill remnants under warrants sealed, unearthing oilcloth bundles sodden, ledgers of disposals meticulous, names crossed deliberate. Poachers silence, witnesses waylaid, Harlan chief among the tallied. Arrests whispered through the diner like smoke from cooling griddle, but Ethan knew the truth layered deeper, the hollow's heart beating in root and rever, woods woven with unrestful essences that fed on sightings to manifest patrols eternal, missed their medium, silenced their creed. Guilt eased fractional in the aftermath's hush, but nights brought echoes persistent. Harlan's knock insistent on trailer door thin, fog pressing panes warped, whispers from vents rusted. Patrol resumes at dawn, join or fade. Ethan mended roads with wariness honed, thermos gripped talisman against the chill that seeped eternal. But Ridge drives slow to crawl, eyes scanning tree line vigilant for movement that came unbidden. Shadows nodding a chord from bowls, Harlan at the fore with jacket open like a wound, invitation glinting in the name tag's thread. Cedar hollow paved over spurs with asphalt black and binding, signs zip-tied defiant to posts, no entry, preserve only. Memorials piping laments, mournful for Harlan under slow rotating lights blue, his mother weeping voice that echoed the river's bend. Ethan counted slabs in every passage ritualized, one rogue, 2, 3, like incantation warding the unseen, distance frail bulwark against what lurks when woods claim keepers better than men ever could, mist rising to remember, pines leaning patient in their vigil and broken.
Dust devils spun lazy across the stubble fields of Blackwood Hollow, Nebraska, where the Platte River murmured secrets to cottonwoods that bent like penitents under relentless prairie wind. Harlan Brooks leaned on his pitchfork in the barn's shadowed maw, sweat tracing rivulets down his weathered neck, the air thick with the tang of fermented hay and something sharper, metallic, like pennies left too long in a pocket. At 45, Harlan tended his acres with hands calloused from wrenches and reins, his days a rhythm of fencemen's and engine guts spilled on oil-stained tarps, evenings shared with his wife, Nora, over canned soup and AM rainbow static. But that April, the wind carried more than pollen and regret. Headaches bloomed behind eyes like prairie fires. Unspoken irritations flared at the co-op, where farmers jostled for seed bags. Children retched into ditches after recess chases, and a bitter film coated tongues even after brushing with baking soda. Harlan spat into the dirt, tasting rust, blaming the spring thaw's churned earth, but his garden wilted overnight. Tomato leaves curling black as if scorched from within, only to straighten defiant by noon before collapsing again in evening's hush. Old Doc Whitaker dismissed it as dust lung from the drought, prescribing lozenges that dissolved to chalk. But Harlan's sleep fractured, dreams laced with gales that whispered names, his own first, then Nora's, voices dry as desiccated husks scraping bone. Mornings left him hollow-eyed, mirrors reflecting a gauntness that deepened shadows under cheekbones, paranoia seeding faint. Had he breathed too deep at the mill last harvest, or was the air itself turning traitor? The hollow stirred uneasy, porches empty save for rocking chairs creaking solo, the feed store's thermometer spiking not from heat, but fevered brows. Mrs. Ellis, the school marm with her perpetual apron of flour, miscarried in the night, her wail carrying on thermals to wake half the block, the midwife finding no cause but a gray residue in the basin that evaporated like shame. Harlan drove to the clinic at dawn, truck rattling over gravel ruts, Nora beside him clutching a thermos of coffee gone cold. Inside, fluorescent buzz warred with coughs muffled behind masks,
Doc Whitaker's hands trembling as he checked Harlan's pulse, veins standing blue against skin gone sallow. "It's in the water maybe," the doc muttered, eyes darting to vents where air hummed unnatural, but tests came back clean, lies printed on county letterhead. That evening, as Harlan forked silage into the troughs, the wind died abrupt, leaving a stillness profound as a held breath. Shadows lengthened disproportionate, pooling at his boots like spilled mercury, and from them rose a murmur, low, insidious. "Breathe me in, Harlan. Taste the old debts." He staggered back, pitchfork clattering, heart-thudding accusations, debts unpaid to the bank after 08's crash, Nora's unspoken grief over the stillborn son buried under the willow. The shadows stirred, tendrils questing air, forming fleeting shapes, a child's outline, translucent, hand outstretched with fingers dissolving to vapor. Paranoia gripped, psychological vice. Was this guilt manifesting or something fouler, the land regurgitating toxins long buried? He fled to the house, door slamming on dusk, Nora's face pale in lamplight, her question, "Bad day?" twisting like a knife, for in her breath he caught the metallic tang, her eyes flecked with something darker, pupils dilating to voids. Sleep evaded, wind resuming its dirge outside, whispers infiltrating cracks around sashes, names of neighbors, sins enumerated, Tom Riley's fence line affair, Mrs. Ellis's pilfered tithes. Harlan rose, shotgun in hand, patrolling the yard where moons silvered furrows, shadows now ambulatory, slinking between cornstalk stubs like coyotes with no form. One coalesced near the wellhead, a figure squat and hooded, auger in spectral grip, drilling silent into earth that bled vapor faint and shimmering. Harlan fired blind, buckshot splintering pump housing, echoes dying to silence broken only by laughter, dry rattling from the river's bend. Dawn found him slumped on the porch, Nora's hand on his shoulder cool as autumn fog, and her voice threaded with the same rasp. "It's just the wind, Harlan." But guilt festered, paranoia blooming full. Had he ignored signs, the odd stink from Riley's barn last fall, dismissing it as fertilizer rot? The hollow convened at the Methodist Hall, faces gaunt under harsh bulbs, Pastor Finch intoning prayers that hung heavy, unanswered. Federal vans arrived unannounced, tires crunching gravel, Agent Laura Kane stepping out in crisp khakis, her kit of samplers whirring like mechanical insects. She knocked methodical, door to door, Harlan admitting her to the kitchen where Nora poured weak tea, Kane's probes sucking air from registers, hoses clailing like serpents. Readings flickered on her tablet, volatiles spiking anomalous, hydrocarbons ghosting vents, patterns tracing a triad, corners at the shuttered foundry, Riley's hayloft, and the old creek bed where Harlan's well tapped deep. Paranoia crested, Harlan's mind racing. Riley, the Sunday school elder with his easy grin and ledger-sharp accounts, donor to every bake sale, his barn a fixture of community loads. Kane's eyes met Harlan's, sharp as flint. Permission for the warrant? He nodded, throat dry, but as she left, shadows trailed her van, tendrils latching unseen, whispers swelling in his ears. He buries what we breathe, joined the drift. Night fell choked, Harlan pacing the loft, lantern casting jittery walls, when the first apparition solidified, a farmhand from 72, lungs black from foundry fumes, formed wraith-thin, coughing vapor that condensed to droplets on rafters. Drilled it deep, the ghost rasped, finger pointing east to Riley's silhouette against horizon, auger glinting in moonlight. Guilt crashed, waves of what-ifs. Had Harlan shared tools last spring, borrowed the drill without question, complicit in the pierce? The wraith dissolved, leaving residue on Harlan's sleeve, gray film that burned skin like acid, paranoia etching doubt. Was the hollow poisoning itself, or had the dead risen to claim breath for breath? Nora stirred below, her cough a wet hack that echoed the ghosts, and Harlan descended, arms around her frail form. But in her breath, he felt it, the venomous Zephyr, intimate, promising more revelations in the dark.
Prairie dawn painted Blackwood Hollow in strokes of bruised lavender, the flat surface glassy as if holding its malice close, while Harlan Brooks watched from the ridge, binoculars trained on Riley's barn, where federal tape fluttered like surrender flags. Agent Kane's team swarmed at first light, doors splintering under ram, shouts muffled by wind that gusted spiteful, carrying echoes of last night's whispers. Harlan descended slow, truck groaning protest, Nora's plea, "Stay safe," a hook in his gut, her form shrinking in the rear view, eyes shadowed with the same unspoken fear that gnawed him raw. At the perimeter, Kane waved him through, her face etched lines of grim certainty, leading to the loft where drums loomed, rusted sentinels leaking faint halos of vapor that twisted unnatural in sunbeams. Inside, the air hung lethal, solvents sharp as betrayal, notebooks splayed on a workbench, maps veined with pencil strokes, wells dotted like targets, arrows charting night air's drift toward sleeping homes. Riley stood cuffed amid the chaos, face impassive as carved limestone, his gaze meeting Harlan's with no flicker of remorse, only a tilt of head that whispered volumes. Neighbor to neighbor, sin to sin. Guilt coiled serpent tight in Harlan's chest. Had he not waved off the odd shipments last summer, trucks rumbling past under moonless skies, dismissing as feed hauls? Paranoia amplified, psychological echo chamber. Every shared beer at the co-op, every fence-line chat, a thread in the web he'd helped spin. Kane flipped pages, dates aligning with illness peaks. 3 a.m. releases, timed to still airs that funneled toxins home. Compounds matched to foundry waste, injected shallow via cordless rig, still warm in its cradle. Apparitions stirred then, born of the breach, shadows detaching from barrel seams, coalescing into forms of the afflicted, the 72 hand, joined by Ellis's unborn, a swirl of mist shaping tiny limbs that reached vaporous, mouths agape in silent inhalations. They circled Riley, tendrils questing his throat, drawing forth coughs that sprayed gray mist, his form paling as if leached. Harlan backed against hay bales that prickled like accusations, whispers rising gale force. He drilled for us, breathe the debt. Riley's eyes bulged, voice cracking dry. Just disposal, cost-cutting. You all benefited, cheaper parts, stronger yields. But the ghosts pressed, forms solidifying, hands, bony, insistent, clamping his airways, vapor inverting, pulling breath outward in visible streams that fed their translucency. Kane and her men froze, guns half drawn, faces draining as the air thickened, metallic taste blooming universal, paranoia rippling through ranks. Was this contagion or judgment unbound? Harlan lunged forward, wrenching a drum's lid, seal breaking with a sigh that unleashed more shades. Dozens now, farm wives with sunken cheeks, children pale as milkweed fluff, all converging on Riley in a vortex of retribution. Guilt peaked, Harlan's mind fracturing. His own hand on the drill once, borrowed for a post hole perhaps, piercing the seam unwitting, complicit in the flow. He seized the notebook, pages crumbling to ash in his grip, flames spontaneous, spreading to manifests that crackled like dry bones. Apparitions feeding on the pyre, forms glowing ember bright. Riley thrashed, shadows coiling tighter, his screams gurgling to silence as mist enveloped, body arching rigid before slumping vacant, eyes staring voids that reflected the hollow's underbelly. The ghosts turned then, gaze collective on Harlan, whispers softening to murmurs of release. Breathe free, the debt drifts on. They dissipated gradual, vapor weaving skyward on resuming breeze, leaving the barn hollowed, drums inert husks. Kane radioed containment, voice edged hysteria, but Harlan slipped out, truck devouring miles back to the ridge where Nora waited, her embrace solid, breath clean as river mist, Blackwood Hollow mended slow, filters humming in basements, quarterly vans charting decline, but scars etched deep, conversations hushed at potlucks, eyes scanning horizons for dust devils that lingered too knowing. Harlan farmed on, pitchfork steady, but nights brought dreams of drills piercing endless,
winds carrying faces that smiled forgiveness laced with warning. Riley vanished into cells, trial a murmur of endangerment charges. His notebook's remnants sealed evidence. But Harlan kept a scorched page, tucked in Bible's leaves, arrows faded, yet pointing inward. Reminder that air holds grudges, turning neighbors' nerve to communal haunt. Subsurface, waiting windless nights to rise anew? The hollow waved from trucks, flags snapping defiant. But in quiet hours, Harlan breathed shallow, tasting not rust, but winters came bitter, snow blanketing seams, but spring-thawed whispers faint, shadows pooling brief in low places. Nora's cough eased, garden greening tentative, but Harlan patrolled fence lines at dusk, ears pricked for the Zephyr's sigh, paranoia of vigilant companion. What if the drift lingered redemption's edge? The venomous Zephyr, a ghost that circled eternal, patient as prairie.
Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more terrifying stories.